And my name is Butch Farabee. I'm a board member for Old Pueblo Archaeology Center, which is a nonprofit organization and which is bringing you the third Thursday Food for Thought presentation. Tonight, I would like to introduce, it's my honor actually to introduce one of my best friends, Walt Dabney. And Walter will get into some of his history along in his presentation, but a snapshot is that for 40 years, more or less, he served in both the federal government and the state of Texas government. Walt and I knew each other in Yosemite. We watched each other's kids grow up and grandkids, etc. And he was the chief ranger of the National Park Service, and he was also the head of the director of the Texas State Parks. So his presentation will be about some of the lands that you and I enjoy. I particularly enjoy the federal lands, the open lands. So I guess I would like to probably ask Walter then just to say hi. And again, it's my honor and pleasure to have you give us a presentation, Walter.
Thanks much, Butch and Alan. It's been fun already working with you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the folks that are on here tonight. I've been doing this presentation now in one form or another for about 9 years. This isn't a job and it's not a business for me. It's a passion. I hope we all have a passion and we're all working on something because we sure need to be these days. I did this presentation first after moving back from Texas to Utah, to Moab, Utah here. And at the end of a 43-year career, and I got back here, and one of the main reasons I moved back from Texas is there's so little public land in Texas, and I'm a mountain biker and a hiker and a camper and a fisherman and a hunter and all kinds of things like many of you are in this room. And I wanted to get back where there's public land and I could go use them. And I tell that story tonight. I got back to Moab, and I started hearing things that didn't sound right to me about the public lands. And so I started researching it, and I tell that story to you here in a minute, and found out that a lot of things that were being spread around simply factually were not true. So I started putting a slideshow program together. League of Women Voters in Southeast Utah invited me to present it for them, and at the end of that program, they said, you got to get this out to more people. We didn't know a whole lot of that, and some of us actually spent our careers working in parks and public lands and forests. And so the American people need to know it, because the American people, when they say federal lands, we own them. That means you and I own them, and they're ours to use and enjoy and protect. And so I put a program together, hit the road with it. About 7 years after starting that, the Canyonlands Natural History Association here in Moab, Utah, associated with Arches and Canyonlands Park, plus the BLM and the Forest Service, said we gotta do a video documentary of this thing and illustrate it professionally, because you can't be everywhere, which is absolutely true. My last opportunity was up in Medora, North Dakota, about 10 days ago, when I was given this program that you'll see tonight at the North Dakota Cowboy Hall of Fame, in conjunction with the dedication of the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library activities up there, which was really fun and an honor and a great opportunity. I talk a lot about Teddy in this program because it'd be a different world had he not been here. The audience that you'll see in this video, because I don't do the PowerPoint anymore, I introduce it and then we watch the video, which is the same story, but it's just much better illustrated that I could do on a PowerPoint. And then we'll have a conversation about it at the end. The elements in here, I talk a lot about Utah because I was in Utah when I put this together. and I've got a lot of information on Arizona that if we want to talk about during the question and answer, I can do that. But all the information in this presentation is available not just in Utah, it's available in any state that has public lands in them. And all you got to do is Google it and look it up, and you can find that out. A lot of misinformation floating around out there, and one of the primary things that's a great source for you if you hear people talking about we were promised this or that, go read your Statehood Act. It'll tell you exactly what was agreed to when, for example, the state of Arizona came into the Union, what lands you were given at statehood, and any other agreements that were made by your territorial government when they became a state. All of this stuff you can look at for yourself. I'm doing this because I love these lands. As I say in the presentation, hell, I'm an old guy. This isn't about me, but I got two daughters and their families, including two grandbuddies of mine that I want to make damn sure have these places just like we have had them growing up. And with that, I look forward to your questions. I love that. Sometimes those discussions have gone longer than the presentation, which is really fun. And but anyway, Alan, I think we could start that now if you still got power. And
I do.
Look forward to talking.
Right. Sorry about that. Yeah, now what did I do with my video? Hold on. There we go.
I am Walt Dabney. It's great to be with you here again today, and it's always a pleasure. I was superintendent here in the 90s. I grew up in Texas, a long way from here. My granddad had a ranch when I was a kid. I did my outdoor activities at the ranch. I didn't realize in Texas in those days that not everybody had one, and so I didn't really grow up using parks or the public lands. I've subsequently found out that's largely because there aren't any in Texas, and ended up going to Texas A&M University and got a degree in recreation and park management in 1970 and spent the next 30 years working for the National Park Service. In 1969, when I was still in school, I got a Western Union telegram. Think of this, a Western Union telegram offering me a GS5 Park Naturalist at Old Faithful. I went, well, hell, I've never been there. That sounds like a fun time. So I loaded up my 60 Falcon Ranchero and headed west from Texas, slept in the back in a roadside park and rolled in there. They showed me how to put my uniform on, and by the end of that summer, I went, you've got to be kidding me. I could do this for a living and get paid for it, and I did for the next 30 years. I was a ranger in Yosemite and then a district ranger at Paradise at Mount Rainier, and then a district ranger for the South District in the Grand Tetons, and then the chief of resource management in Everglades, having said a real ranger never would go east of the Mississippi River. And there I was. And then the next thing I did was another thing I said I'd never do, is work in Washington, D.C. And I did that for 5.5 years as chief ranger for the National Park Service. And among my duties there, in 1988, when I was there, Yellowstone caught on fire, and I had the Park Service fire program. So I spent a lot of time trying to explain in 4 or 5 minute sound bites on television what was going on in Yellowstone and why we couldn't put it out and why it may not be as bad as they think. And I'm not sure I was very successful, but Yellowstone fire went out, and I got the opportunity to come out here for the superintendent in Canyonlands, Arches, Natural Bridges, and Hoven Week. I did another thing I said I'd never do, and that's leave Moab. And my home state said, would you come down here and and help us with Texas state parks. So I did that for 11 and a half years and then retired in Austin, Texas. I'm originally from there, as I said, and pretty quickly realized the ranch is gone. It is no more. Except for the state parks, this state that is the second most populous in the nation and the second biggest geographically in the nation has very limited public land available for recreation. So we wanted to come back west, and we wanted to come back to Moab. So we did that about 9 years ago. And so I'm going to tell that story a little bit, and I'm going to tell you that the reason I'm doing this talk today, and the reason we're filming it today, and the reason that I feel so passionate about it, I'm on the road sort of like a traveling preacher, is that when I got back out here, I hear people saying, man, these lands are locked up, or the Constitution does not say that the federal government can own land. At statehood, we were promised to get our land back. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, I've only done this 43 years, but I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. I think I'm going to start looking into it. And so what you're going to see the rest of the afternoon are the kind of things that I found out to be true. My goal in this whole thing is everything that's in this program is absolutely accurate. And in 7 years of doing it, I've never had anybody share with me, which I invite you to do because I want to get it right, share with me that anything was inaccurate or wrong, either factually or historically. I want it to be absolutely right on. The only thing in here to me that is political, and I don't go into any of the issues with my spin on it, the only thing I see in here that is political is I am absolutely rabid about the fact that it would be unconscionable that we transfer these lands out of federal ownership, which means that we all own them. So let's get along with this, going into your public lands. And when I say the federal lands or public lands, that just means that you and I are both landowners, and these are ours. You recognize the United States, you recognize the shape of the states. This is what we look like today, but it didn't always look that way. In fact, when European man arrived on the East Coast, it wasn't an abandoned piece of land. There were a whole lot of people here, thousands and thousands of Native American people, hundreds of tribes, and my guess unequivocally is they were not sitting around hoping that Europeans would discover them. And the longer we've been here, I am absolutely certain the more sure they are of that fact. But that's not my story today. That's not what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the first English colony arrived here in 1607 at Jamestown. By 1776, the colonists had decided they'd had enough of British rule, and they started the American Revolution. And it was not at all certain that we were going to prevail. In fact, we lost most of the battles we fought with Britain. But at the same time we were fighting, they were meeting in Philadelphia with a group of men who were trying to figure out, if we are successful, how are we going to run this operation, this new country? And so they were trying to design the Articles of Confederation. And one of the biggest sticking points, perhaps the sticking point, was that the states of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, 6 out of the 13 colonies, claimed lands all the way to the Mississippi River. The other 7 said, that's a deal killer. Those belong to all of us, not just you, just because you claim them. So they negotiated that for a while, they argued about it for a while, and what they decided, number one, is that no state would exist until this document was signed, that these lands be considered as common property of the nation because they were wrested from the common enemy by the blood and treasure of the 13 states, meaning that all of us and from all these states died, were wounded, lost our homes, our treasures, everything else to win this. We all are going to own this. So that's what they did. And over the next few years, all these lands that became these states were ceded by the original 13 colonies all the way to the Mississippi River. So how did we get the rest of it? Well, this is what we won from Britain. In the Treaty of Paris in 1783, France, England, the United States, and actually Spain signed this treaty. England ceded all of this country here. So that was given back by the first 13 colonies became the first public lands that we all owned in common, or actually our ancestors owned at that time. The next big piece of it was the Louisiana Territory. We had access to the Mississippi River, but we had no way to get through the port of New Orleans because France owned and controlled that port. So Thomas Jefferson started talking to Napoleon Bonaparte, who was in the process of starting his third or fourth or fifth war in continental Europe. They fought for 100 years, I think. And he needed money. And he said, okay, instead of just talking about New Orleans, how about if I sell you the whole enchilada? And so I think the best real estate deal in American history happened when Thomas Jefferson, for $15 million, bought the entire Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The next one, we fought the War of 1812. We nearly got beat there again. We finally just quit fighting. In 1818, we threatened to go to war with Britain up here with this piece of land. Britain and the U.S. finally worked out an agreement with the British cession of 1818. We agreed nothing north of the 49th parallel would be American, and they agreed anything south of the 49th parallel in this area here would not be British. The next thing was Spain. We had, unfortunately, slaves escaping out of the colonies. Unfortunate that we had that period of our history. And Native Americans raiding into the colonies there. We told Spain, we're going to invade you if you don't fix this. Spain said, I'll tell you what, we owe you $5 million. How about we give it to you and we call the debt good? So for $5 million, we got East and West Florida and this piece of disjunct Spanish land. I'm not sure exactly what those were or why they were there. The next thing was my home state of Texas, 1836. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Texas because people always ask me, don't you wish this was like Texas? And I said, no. No, I don't. If you're talking about the fact that there are no public lands in Texas, no, I don't. So anyway, Texas rebelled in 1836, fought the Mexican government and won their independence. And for the next 9 years, Texas was not part of the United States. It was an independent country, the Republic of Texas. The next one was the United States invaded Mexico in 1846 at the Mexican War. At the same time, Americans were threatening to fight Britain again. I don't know why in the world, but we were going to fight Britain again. And you remember from your history the old term 54-40 or fight. 54-40. If they didn't cede us everything below the 54th parallel, we were going to go to war. Well, Polk said, I'm not fighting Mexico and England at the same time. They cut a deal with Britain that ceded this Northwest Territories, everything below, again, the 49th parallel, and everything above that went to Britain in the form of Canada. Anybody know where the 54th parallel is? It is actually the southern boundary of Alaska. So what we were doing is we're saying we claim everything all the way to Alaska, which was then Russia. So without going to war, we got that cession. We won the Mexican War, and Mexico recognized that this was Texas, and they also ceded in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, all this country, including those states that you see there, to the United States. So war. The next one was the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, and again we were threatening to go to war with Mexico because we were trying to build the southern link of the transcontinental railway through here, and we needed this land, so instead of going to war, we bought it from Mexico for $10 million. The next piece, probably the second best real estate purchase that we ever did, was buying Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. 2 cents an acre. Pretty good deal. Russia wants it back. I don't think we're going to do that.
And then the next one was Hawaii. Hawaii was a stable country. It had a queen. It was a peaceful country. Americans went down there to grow fruit and raise cattle and so forth, and decided this would be a nice thing for us to have, and I think we're in danger. So they asked the federal government to send in the Marines. They did. We actually just took over Hawaii and annexed it, and it became a territory. And the first governor of Hawaii was a guy named Dole. Anybody eat pineapple in here? Dole. The next was in the Spanish-American War, when we got the island of Puerto Rico in winning the Spanish-American War. And the last piece of land was the American Virgin Islands, which we bought from Denmark in 1917, just as we went into World War I. So, war, treaty, purchase, that's how we got all of these lands which we owned in common. Remember that I was saying that we got this in 1848 at the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. One of the things people talk about is we want our lands back. What was this country when the Mormon pioneers came into the Salt Lake Valley? It was Mexico. I guess we were immigrants into Mexico at the time. Kind of interesting thought. Anyway, property clause. I was told that the Constitution does not in any way suggest that the federal government could own land. Simply not true. The property clause of the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3 says, the Congress shall have the power to dispose of and to make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And nothing in this Constitution shall be construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States. We can own property and we can own territory in common. The government did, and in fact they did after that war. So how did those lands that I just showed you we got all together, how did we start getting those into private hands? There were a lot of reasons. First of all, we had no money when we won our independence, so we paid our soldiers in land. If you were a private or enlisted man, you could get 100 acres of farmable land, up to 50 or 500 acres if you were a colonel or higher. We sold land for $1 an acre. So a section of land, 640 acres, would cost you $640. And you think in today's terms, what a steal. $1 in 1785 was a lot of money. And $640 was an absolute fortune. That raised to $1.25, and over the time this was being done, nearly 180 million acres of this land that I just showed you where we got was transferred to private ownership. Then came the Homestead Act in 1862 during the Civil War, and under the Homestead Act, you could claim 160 acres of land if you were the head of a household, and the head of a household could be a man or a woman. That was increased to 320 and then to 640 over time, and then even more after that. The reason for that being that the good lands got homesteaded first. All those lands in those days were used for agriculture. So the good lands, the ones near water, went first. It took more land as you got further away from water, and as you went west, the landscape became drier and drier as well. So it took more acreage. You had to be 21 years old. You had to live on the land for 5 years. You had to build a house on it, and then it was yours. And under that program, on top of the 180 million acres that was sold to people, another 270 million acres went to private ownership. That's starting to be real acreage now. Then we still didn't have enough money, so we needed to build the railroads, and we started paying to build the railroads in land. So as the railroads went west, 200 feet on either side of the track was deeded to the railroad as railroad land. In addition to that, for every mile of completed track in a checkerboard pattern, as much as 12,500 acres of land was transferred to the railroad, who then, of course, sold it to land speculators or private individuals. And under that program, on top of 180, 270, and another 180 million acres were now transferred to private ownership. Texas, interesting story. I didn't know this So I started putting this together, and I went to Texas history. This is what they were fighting over in 1836. That's what Texas was. And I didn't realize it, but that whole country, that whole economy was based on cotton. And when it was based on cotton, what did that mean? You had, in those days, unfortunately, you had slaves that were doing the work. And so the problem with that, and one of the reasons for the Texas Revolution, and if you look at the correspondence, Santa Anna was coming north out of Mexico because slavery was illegal in Mexico. And he was going to enforce it in Texas, that you cannot do that here. Mexico was defeated, and Texas became an independent country. This was all Texas. But Texas claimed this land all the way up into that panhandle there. And in fact, the top of that panhandle is about Rawlins, Wyoming. One time was claimed by Texas. Subsequently, in 1850, they sold this to the United States for $10 million. Texas lands. Why does Texas not have any land? People ask me all the time. The same thing is true in virtually all the states other than the 11 western states. We're going to talk about that. Texas is 96% privately owned land. How did it get that way? When Texas won its independence, if you had a Spanish or Mexican land grant, that was a valid deed to that property. They also gave away land, a level 1 head grant in Texas, which my granddad's ranch was part of. His father bought it after the Civil War. He was a wounded Confederate soldier, came back there, bought that in 1883. And what was left of it was part of one of those original head grants from about 1840. And you could claim, if you were the head of a household in a level 1, up to 4,600 acres of land, which is a good piece of land, but it was all had to be farmable. Republic of Texas head grants, we paid the Revolutionary War soldiers in land. We built the railroads paying for them in land, and by 1900, there really wasn't any land left. What there was left went in the permanent school fund, and that's still the case today. It's used to generate money for schools. Most of you, or all of you in this room, recognize this fellow, another Civil War veteran, wounded at Shiloh, lost an arm, came down twice through the Colorado River, and those of you that have spent time on the river, those of us that have, the thought of launching in a wooden boat, going through that country with no idea what's around the next corner, is just continues to astound me. And they did it twice, and they had problems, obviously, but they did it twice. I'm not certainly focusing on that today, but John Wesley Powell, who you know was a surveyor, made his living surveying. By 1877 was the head of the U.S. Geologic Survey, and he went to the National Academy of Science meeting in 1877, and he made this statement: most of the land west of the 100th meridian cannot support conventional agriculture requiring at least 20 inches of annual rainfall or irrigation. And we know now, with what's happening with Lake Powell and Lake Mead, it is not sustainable what we're doing now. In no way is it sustainable, especially when you think of some of our practices, and I'm certainly not against agriculture, but when you're irrigating cotton and alfalfa in the desert, that is not sustainable. There's no way it can be. What is the 100th meridian? Runs up through about I-35 in Texas, all the way up through Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, through the Dakotas. What Wesley Powell was saying is all this country to the Sierra Nevadas cannot sustain conventional agriculture. Not enough rain. And if you think about it, those lands that were 160 acres, 240 and so forth, 320 and then 640, those lands were back east. As they came here, they weren't claiming those lands because you could not make a living. There was no water to do that. That was his idea about the aridity of that country then, and it is so true now. In 1785, Thomas Jefferson established the rectangular survey system for gridding the entire United States. It looks like this. Many of you know how that works. 6 miles square, a township, 36 square miles in each township. The entire country is gridded that way. Utah would look like this with that grid pattern in there. And if you see those blue dots in each of those yellow sections, Those are the state sections that they got at statehood. What does that mean? At statehood, Utah received sections 2, 16, 32, and 36 in each one of those 36 square mile blocks. Not all states did. I don't know why the difference. Nevada got 2 sections per township. Colorado got 2. Wyoming got 2. Either somebody said it's because Utah's more dry. Utah's the second driest. Nevada's more dry than Utah, and it got 2 sections. So I don't know. Maybe Brigham was a better negotiator. Who knows? The state got right at 7.5 million acres at statehood. This was given to them out of that cache of federal lands that we all own. The state was carved out of those federal lands meaning lands we own in common. They have sold over 4 million of those acres since then, which I'm not arguing is a bad thing. That's what they were given it for. I'm just saying if it's state land, it's not necessarily public land. And it was given in the Statehood Act for these purposes. However you want to use it, it's used to do these things: public schools, universities, reservoirs, hospitals, and so forth. So that's what they're selling and using those lands to maximize the profits of. Utah Statehood Act. Remember I said, people said, they told us at statehood we were going to get our lands back. Well, first of all, they first got in here when it was Mexico. Then in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it became United States territory. And the state of Utah was carved out of that territory, made a state in 1896. And the notion that they were assured at statehood that they would be given these lands after they were a state. The Statehood Act actually says these things: that the people inhabiting said proposed state do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundary thereof. Not too unequivocal. It also says, the said state of Utah shall not be entitled to any further or other grant of land for any purpose than as expressly provided in this act. I don't see anything ambiguous about those statements. It's pretty clear that unless Congress changes their mind, that's what you get. Unfortunate thing occurred in 1901 with President of the United States. William McKinley was assassinated. That's always a tragedy. One of the things that came out of that is that we were absolutely lucky to have this guy as his vice president, who then took over the presidency. And what we know, enjoy, work on, and make our living on right now is largely attributable to this guy right here. One of his philosophies is this: it's not what we have that'll make us a great nation, it's what we do with it that'll make us a great nation. Absolutely true. This is how we were logging in those days. And we were absolutely had the potential to use up our entire forest system. These crews would come in here, cut everything down, snake the logs out, leave this, and move on to the next place. Then the grasses came in, because there was still some topsoil. Grasses came in where the trees had been. But then we introduced hundreds of thousands of livestock, mostly sheep, on this, which completely wiped out the grasslands. And then this sort of thing happened. This is Manti, Utah. This happened in many places throughout the West where there was no more watershed, and the mud and the snow and the rain just came down the mountain and wiped them out. People started screaming, "We need some help. This is not going to work." And in 1891, Congress passed the Forest Reserve Act, and the Forest Reserve Act allowed the President of the United States out of that public domain to carve out what became national forests, but as forest reserves. It was signed into law by Benjamin Harrison, who set aside 13 million acres. Then came Grover Cleveland, who set aside another 25 million. And then McKinley was able to set aside 7 million before he was assassinated. And then came Teddy. And if you add all those figures up, the total acreage today in the National Forest System is about 193 million acres. Most of it is right there. Forest Service was established in 1905 to start taking care of these forest reserves. The first chief of the Forest Service was a guy named Gifford Pinchot. You want to read a good book, read The Big Burn. If you haven't read it, I seriously encourage you to do that. Tells the story of Pinchot, tells the story of Pinchot and his relationship with Roosevelt, which was really fascinating. Pinchot's dad had made his money doing that logging picture at first. He'd clear cut, he was a robber baron, he was a timber baron. Gifford thought he was going to do that. His dad said, no, you're not. You're going to fix what I trashed. And sent him to France and Germany to silviculture school, forestry school. And they came back, got the Yale Forestry School going. Pinchot would have his students take topographic maps under the Forest Reserve Act, take topographic maps, draw in what should be a forest preserve or reserve, take it over to Teddy, and I think they put it on Teddy's desk, and then the two of them, both of them loved to box. And they would go down in the basement to the gym of the White House and beat the hell out of each other for an hour, and then come up there, probably didn't take a shower, just signed off a couple of more new forests and went on about their business. And to give you an idea what that does, that was Teddy in 1906. That's Teddy in 1905. These are just samples. This is Teddy in 1908. All of these were set aside then, and if you know what you do, the LaSalle's, a lot of it's private land. I guarantee you by the time much longer, it would have been all private land, and we wouldn't have had the access we do today. So the Forest Reserve Act really made a difference. Agricultural appropriation. Some of the states started getting upset with the use of this and said that the states that are up there, and if you look at it closely, one of them that's not there is Utah, because Utah supported this because of the flooding and, you know, the Salt Lake Front, when you got hundreds of thousands of sheep up there and you wonder why your water is getting a little bitter, you have a clue about that. These states said, we're not going to sign the Agricultural Appropriation Act in 1907 if you don't put an end to this. So Roosevelt had till March the 7th of 1907 to sign it. So what did they do? They went back in the boxing ring. When they were through, they signed another 21 forest reserves, and he signed the bill which got him the Agricultural Appropriation Act, and what we have in the forest system today is what they had done by this point in time in 1907. Forest Service mission. It doesn't say use it all up today. It says use this in a way that meets the needs of present and future generations. Antiquities Act passed to take care of special historic and scientific interests. It's kind of interesting. It's been used by every president since it was passed, 18 or 19 presidents. All of these national parks now would not be in place if they had not been first established as national monuments, because in many places, not in all, but in many of these places, the locals opposed them. For example, Grand Canyon. Teddy walked out there like I am right now, hoping not to fall in either. And he said, there's nothing humans can do to make that a better picture. Nothing we can do to improve what you're seeing here right now. So he tried 3 different times to get a national park establishment. It was defeated by local opposition. And this is one of the newspapers that were probably not in support based on what they wrote in the paper. The national park idea represented a fiendish and diabolical scheme, and whoever fathered such an idea must have been suckled by a sow and raised by an idiot. That is not a pro-park position. So Teddy signed off on it as a national monument in 1908. You ought to ask Arizona if they'd like to get rid of it now. It's worth millions of dollars a day to the state of Arizona. Teddy's legacy: set aside over 230 million acres of land, 100 national forests, 51 fish and wildlife sanctuaries, reservations, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments. Well, people started coming back, trappers from the West, and talking about these lands that were smoking and belching fire, and these animals that were just unbelievably beautiful and prolific. Folks got to thinking, man, these guys have been out there way too long by themselves. So they sent an expedition, the Hayden expedition in 1871, out to look at Yellowstone, to evaluate it. And on that trip was a guy named William Henry Jackson, who had been a Civil War photographer, who took a picture of Old Faithful in 1871. It's an amazing photograph for those of you that are into photography. Also on that trip was a guy named Thomas Moran, who's one of our great painters, who painted the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And they got back, and the expedition gave its report, and it was clear, hey, there's something out there. And so in March of 1872, President Grant signed the National Park Act that established Yellowstone National Park as really the first national park in the world. The first time a piece of land like that was set aside, not for royalty, not for nobility, not for wealthy people, but for everybody. Yellowstone, again, opposed by locals. It said, this is going to be the end of Bozeman, Montana. Have you tried to find a parking place in Bozeman, Montana? Yeah, you can't do it. They said the same thing about Grand Tetons, that Jackson, Wyoming, when it was set aside as a monument, Grand Tetons, Jackson, Wyoming will become a ghost town. Have you been to the ghost town of Jackson? That wasn't very good forecasting. The argument was nobody will ever get there, and I think it's 4.5 to 5 million get there every year now, which is worth huge amounts of money to that part of the world. And the delegation worked so hard to keep it from being funded that they finally had to send the Army in there, and the Army was in Yellowstone for 32 years, leaving in about 1918. And if you know Yellowstone, Mammoth Hot Springs was Fort Yellowstone. The rock houses up there were the officers' quarters in Yellowstone. So Yellowstone, they kept the poachers out, and did all that with the Army before the Park Service was established. One of the things about the establishment of Yellowstone, to me, is it is indicative of how we had a good idea, but we didn't do it right from the start. What am I talking about that? Take these two animals right here, the bison and the elk. Can you say, Yellowstone's 2 million acres? And they said, that's 2 million acres locked up. If you look at this, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is in the red. Yellowstone Act says that you will maintain this place, and I'm paraphrasing it, you will maintain this place in its natural condition, and wildlife in their natural condition. This 2 million acres Yellowstone is 8,000 feet. In the winter, it is completely buried in snow. It's well below zero. That was the summer range for those two animals I pointed out, bison and elk. And when it started to be winter, those animals came down through here. These are 6 national forests now in the green. Came down through here. And if you've been to Jackson Hole and you look at the National Elk Refuge there, and that big fence that goes across, that's not fencing those animals in. That's fencing them out of downtown Jackson, Wyoming, where they used to migrate through in the winter. So if we were going to do anything now, we need to make sure we manage what there is. All the white country is privately owned land now, and manage this in a way that is supportive of our ideas for Yellowstone National Park. Another one that I dealt with a whole lot when I was here as superintendent, when they first started talking about the establishment of Canyonlands, Senator Frank Moss and the Park Service proposed a 1 million acre erosion basin park. The other side, Senator Wallace Bennett, wanted 35,000 acres in the park in 3 pieces: the confluence, Needles, and Island in the Sky. So over a number of years, they argued it down to where when it was finally passed, this is what was actually passed. Later, the Mays District was added. And the total of that was 257,000 acres. I think it's 334 now. They didn't put Glen Canyon in because it has a little tar sand in it. And so instead of making it what it should have been, which over time is a gold mine, if you don't screw it up, you can figuratively mine it forever. I don't know how many times I've stood out on this Grandview Point in my flat hat and uniform and have visitors, which I just love, come to you like filings to a magnet. And we'd talk for 2 hours and they'd say, "Where's the park here?" And they'd invariably say, "Well, if you step one more step over there, you're in the bowl quickly." And it goes all the way around here. And they say, "Well, I assume it's that big bowl." But it's not. That's what they finally argued it down to. And it makes, from a management standpoint, absolutely 0 sense. And if you did anything right here that would compromise that, it would be an absolute tragedy. Wallace Bennett said unequivocally that if you do this Canyonlands Park, this is what's going to happen to where we are now. It'll be the end of everything. All commercial use and business activity would be forever banned, and nearly all of southern Utah's growth would be forever stunted. Well, the reality is that outdoor recreation in Utah is worth about $6.1 billion a year in economic output. That's goods and services associated with this. In the United States, it's $862 billion, and in Utah, that's about 67,000 jobs that are affected with it. And these aren't my figures. These are from the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2022. All these things you can check yourself. Park Service was established because by 1916, the Department of Agriculture and the Army were running different units of the National Park Service. They decided to combine them under one agency. A little different mandate in that you're going to provide for the use and enjoyment today of those areas in a way that leaves them unimpaired for the future. And in that park system, I think we now have about 500 units in the National Park System. The best of our prehistoric and historic resources, the places that make us who we are as Americans, and those special natural places, whether it's Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon or the Redwoods, which I think are unique in the world and that we hold in trust, in essence, for the world. BLM, established in 1946, took the General Land Office and the Grazing Service and combined them. Harry Truman established it. It manages all the lands that have not been designated as national parks, forests, refuges, military reservations, whatever it is, all those lands. It also manages about 250 million acres of land still. And it also manages all oil and gas and minerals management on the Forest Service and BLM lands. Their mission, like the Forest Service, is to use it wisely today and save it for future generations as well. This is a terribly important law that was passed in 1976, changed a lot of things. There had been a constant transfer of public land into private ownership. In 1976, the Federal Land Policy Management Act was passed, and it ended the Homestead Act, although there had been very little homesteading since about 1935 when the Taylor Grazing Act was passed. It said, Congress, the public lands will be retained in federal ownership unless as a result of a land use planning procedure provided for in the Act, it is determined that disposal of a particular parcel will serve the national interest. Congress can always dispose of lands, but there's no more goal to get rid of those lands. In fact, the contrary is true now. So what are the lands we have left? About 28% of the United States is still in common ownership. We all own it. The yellow is BLM, the light green is Forest Service, the chartreuse kind of color right there are national park areas. The red are Native American reservations, which are not public land. The blue are military reservations and so forth. These lands back here where you said where there's not public land, those were cut over timberlands that then were bought up by the federal government and replanted in large measure by the CCC. They were completely destroyed lands. So, your public lands. One of the big criticisms that some of these people are thinking they want to move these lands out of federal ownership, they're saying, well, the federal government isn't making a good return on these lands. They're not running this like a business. Having worked in federal and state government for many years, you can only do what the legislative body allows you to do. So let's look at multiple use a little bit. Timber. Timber is generally a bid process. If you're going to do a timber sale, you go out and look at this sale, and then you put it out in the market, and timber companies will bid on that. That's pretty straightforward. Oil and gas, however, for 95 years, the royalty rate for oil and gas on federal lands was 12.5. Same with coal. This administration just raised it to about what the state is doing here in Utah, for example, at 16.67. That's going to increase the royalty coming into the federal government, which is also a benefit to the state, which I'll share with you in a second. Hard rock minerals, this is the one that just absolutely floors me. Anybody can go out, whether they're American or a Canadian or an Australian or an Argentinian, and if they establish positions on public land and they start mining and get approval to mine, the federal government gets nothing for that. No royalty whatsoever. That was established in 1872, so that's 150 years old. We need to look at that, because in the case of hard rock minerals, the state of Utah, and I don't know whether that's the right number or not, gets a 4% royalty for metalliferous minerals. Gold, copper, iron, zinc, any of those kind of things. For fissionable minerals like uranium, it's an 8% royalty. So we ought to at least index it to what the state charges. Recreation. I tell you, I use the public lands all the time. I mountain bike, I hike, fish, hunt, river run. I don't do much horse stuff, but all those, and I never pay a thing. Never pay a thing. And I would be glad, I'm not speaking for you guys, I would be glad to buy an annual pass to the public lands if that money went back in to putting people on the ground out there to help run these places. Right now, it's free. Like, other than in a developed campground, it's free. And you say, well, I pay my taxes. So do the people in New York who will never, ever be here to use them in many cases. Fish and wildlife, I can buy an elk tag if I'm lucky enough to draw an elk tag and go hunt. I never pay a thing to go hunting. Try that in Texas or any other states that have little publicly accessible land. Scientific and historic. And here's a good one to talk about. And on all these issues, I will not take a philosophical or political stand on them. I just want you to know the information. But in the case of grazing, for example, and all these are from the USDA, Department of Agriculture, if you're going to put your stock on private land, non-irrigated pasture land, the average cost to you to put an AUM or an animal unit month, which is a cow, calf, a horse, 5 sheep, or 5 goats, as an example, it would cost you in Utah $1,650. If you're talking about the state costs and go down to Utah, if it's a single section of land, it's going to cost $5.82 an AUM. If it's a blocked up piece, like we're traded out of Canyonlands or something, it's $10.05. The federal rate, $1.35. Not arguing whether we ought to graze on public lands or not, but I'll just tell you, it would seem reasonable to me if we're talking about a piece of federal land and a piece of state land right next to each other, you ought to at least index it to what the state is charging in each individual state, and that would be fair. It'd be hard to argue, in my opinion. But that's grazing. Well, of all these receipts that come into the federal government, generally speaking, the state, in this case of Utah, gets half of those receipts. Half of the grazing receipts, half of the oil and gas royalty receipts. They would get half of the minerals or hard rock minerals receipts. they would get half of anything else that was raised in price. So in 2018, Utah got nearly $74.5 million of revenue sharing. In addition, PILT is a formula of acreage, federal acreage in a county and the population, and the federal government pays in lieu of taxes that amount of money. So in total, Utah got $115 million in 2018 from the federal government for these lands in Utah. Well, outdoor recreation, which is something I feel really, really strongly about, and I want to talk about it a lot. These are not just stuff I like to do, they're stuff I know a lot of you like to do. This picture in many states would be almost impossible. Just getting access to that river across private lands is often not possible at all. If you jumped in the river at a highway bridge and are walking down the river like this, in many states you'd be trespassing now. You'd be either on the guy's land on the left or on the right because you're standing on the bottom. And so the public lands, you could go fish in so many places, and it's your land and you can go use it. Four-wheel drive. When I was in Texas, one of the programs I had was the grants program. We were constantly looking for places for four-wheel drive users who are legitimate users of the public land to find a place to go. And about the time we'd use motorized trail grant money coming from excise tax on gasoline, and we talked to some rancher about can they use your ranch roads for backcountry roads and so forth. And they say, how much are you going to pay me? We'd come up with an amount, and then his neighbors would find out that he was going to have four-wheel drive vehicles on his ranch. And every time the potential agreements fell through. That's why all these Texans and people from back east come out here to go do their interest and activity. Mountain biking is one of my passions. There are thousands of miles of trail on public lands available for riding. New trails are being built all the time. In states with little public land, it's a serious challenge to piece together any extensive trail network, as each piece of private land access has to be negotiated and is often not possible. Hunting. I've been a hunter since I was very young. To be able to hunt on private land in states with little public land is expensive. That's why you have so many hunters coming from the east, from non-public land states, out to the western states where the public lands exist, and they buy an out-of-state hunting and fishing license, and they basically then can hunt for free. And now, one of the groups I talked to recently was the backcountry hunters and anglers who understand this clearly, that if these lands go away, they got no place to go. River running, I dealt with this all the time, people launching their boats. In some places they couldn't get out of the boat or they'd be trespassing. Others, if you're going to do a multi-day trip and you want to camp on the shore, and the definition of public land and private land is the mean high water, and you're not carrying a surveyor with you, then you're at the whim of that rancher who's saying, you're on my land, keep going. And so many differences here. All of you that are in the river running business, you know good and well that we've got it made. If you're a horse user and you want to do long rides or overnight pack trips, or if you're a backcountry hunter or fisherman that want to access your special spots on a horse, you've got to go to the public land states. If you're in a state that has no public lands and you're a horse user, your options are very limited, and probably you're going to spend a whole lot more time in a corral than you are doing the things you love to do. If you're a backpacker, there are literally thousands of miles of trails on public lands for you to hike, camp, explore, all over the United States. Most of these are on public lands. We have trails that go all the way from the Mexican border to Canada. We have them in the east that are largely in public lands, like the Appalachian Trail that runs through the Smokies and Shenandoah and Blue Ridge Parkway. We probably have the finest collection of trails for backcountry users anywhere in the entire world, right here in the United States. In 1969, when I was a park naturalist, I walk this boardwalk a couple of times a week on my roving interpretive patrol, looking for somebody to talk to. Now you just hope you don't get pushed into the thermal feature that you were going to talk about. This is a state park in Texas, Enchanted Rock. It could be a picture from Arches National Park. People have found these places. COVID did a lot of bad things, but it also put a whole lot of people that had never experienced the outdoors, that wanted to get the hell out of the city and go out and enjoy this country, and they found out this is okay. This is fun. So I want to kind of coast down to the finish line here and talk about something that is absolutely real. And I'm going to talk to you why. Because again, my only political position in this is I absolutely think it would be an irreversible tragedy if we lose these lands out of public ownership. And there are people who are working every single day diligently trying to figure out a way to get these lands out of federal common ownership. To give you an example, and I'm using Utah because that's where we are and that's where I live. But in 2012, they passed the Transfer of Public Lands Act, HB 148, which was signed by the governor. And what that said is you, by 2014, federal government, it's not binding on the federal government, but it certainly shows the intent of the people that push this forward. You will transfer all the BLM land, all the Forest Service non-wilderness land, all the Glen Canyon on the Utah side of the Colorado, all of the Grand Staircase Escalante, 31 million acres to the state of Utah by 2014. And it would become state-owned land, and the state could keep it or sell it. People say, well, we would keep it because we understand people like it. How realistic is that if it goes all of a sudden from 50 states paying to maintain these places to one state? What would those costs be? Using Utah as an example, and I'm using 2018 as the fiscal year, those costs have obviously gone up today. In 2018, the Bureau of Land Management in Utah spent for their operation and maintenance budget about $125.5 million. For the Forest Service, it was right at $70 million. For the National Park Service at Glen Canyon, right at $12 million. Now, the real ringer that's going to get nothing but worse, presumably as we go forward because of climate change, is fire. The fire season in 2018 on BLM cost right at $48 million. Forest Service fire cost in Utah was right at $36.5 million. Those are huge figures that are going to do nothing but increase. In addition, we talked previously about the fact that Utah received half the revenues that came in on public lands in Utah, so $74.5 million, and then they were paid in lieu of taxes, PILT, another $40 million. So if the state of Utah took this, they would have to come up with $406 million before they even started to make any money on these lands. That is a huge sum. In addition, in that same year, the state of Utah, on private lands and state land, just in fire costs, spent another $35 million, which would be really difficult, especially when you think that in the case of Utah, for example, the U.S. population of 335 million people as a tax base are paying for these lands, whether they're in Utah or Wyoming or wherever. If these go to the state of Utah, that tax base now goes from 335 million to 3.3 million people that are going to try to absorb these costs. That doesn't even make sense. They said, well, there's another section of the Statehood Act that says we're supposed to transfer it. That section says this, and I'm not a lawyer, you can read it yourself. 5% of the proceeds of the sales of public lands lying within said state, which shall be sold by the United States subsequent, after that land became a state, subsequent to the admission of said state into the Union, shall be paid to the state to be used as permanent fund, the interest of which only shall be expended for the support of the common schools within the state. The same wording is in Wyoming, Colorado, I think it's in Iowa that I've read, and probably many others. What it's saying is if we sell any more federal land in Utah, after the cost of sales, out of the net proceeds, will get 5%. Federal government gets the other 95%, but the lands then are gone, never to be gotten back. And as Frederick Law Olmsted said, if that happens, this is what's going to happen. Those who are rich enough reserve for themselves the choicest natural scenes. Unless government acts, all places favorable in scenery to the recreation of the mind and body will be closed against the mass of the people. And what that then looks like is a sign like this, not one that says, y'all come on in, welcome. It'll be, it's now private, and you're not invited to come in there. So I'll just close by saying, I sure don't want to see that. And I think, I'm an old guy. I'm going to get to weather it out, but I see a lot of faces in this room that are good and young and have a lot more years to go enjoy these lands. You have got to stay vigilant. You've got to understand there are people that are not stupid, they're very smart, and they're looking for a way to get these lands out of public hands. And when they say no, there will be public hands and they're going to the state lands, the state sells land to raise money. And there's no way they can foot that kind of bill. One fire season would wipe any western state out as far as trying to run these lands themselves. So with that, I thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you again. I appreciate what you do out there on the public lands. And after this, I'll be glad to try to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Well, Walter, you've done it again. This is probably the sixth time I've heard your program, and I've enjoyed it immensely. Before we get into the Q&A and some of the chat, I would like to turn this back over for a moment or two to our Executive Director, Al Dart. Al?
Okay, let me bring up my PowerPoint file here in just a second. And I apologize for the black bar in the screen in the first part of the presentation there. Walt was able to help me get rid of that.
Well, it's back. So,
It's back?
well, it is sort of anyway.
Okay. Old Pueblo Archaeology Center's mission is to educate children and adults about archaeology and other cultures, to foster preservation of archaeological and historical sites, and to develop a lifelong concern for the importance of non-renewable resources in traditional cultures. I'd like to just share some of the ways that we implement that mission for Old Pueblo. We do a lot of educational tours, mostly to archaeological, historical, and traditional culture sites. These are 4 of the tours that we have coming up between now and January. Some rock art, rock imagery tours, some historical archaeology, some pre-contact archaeology in various places in Arizona. So if you want to check out our website there, or send us an email, info@oldpueblo.org, you can find out more about these. We offer classes and workshops, many of which now are online by Zoom. So our next one coming up online is a class that I'll be teaching on the Hohokam culture of Southern Arizona. It'll be on Wednesday evening starting in September, 2 hours per night for 14 weeks. On October 24th, our flint knapping expert, Sam Greenleaf, will be offering an arrowhead making and flint knapping workshop at our facility here in Tucson, Arizona. And in January, I just got this onto our schedule, I'll be offering another online Archaeology of the Southwest course. that will be an expanded version of the ones I've been doing in previous years. This one will be 18 weeks long for 2 hours per evening. We do have a pretty substantial online presence now. We do a quarterly bulletin called Old Pueblo Archaeology. Each issue provides information about archaeology, history, and cultures, and includes a lot of illustrations. So that's our last issue on the left. This is the one that'll be coming out pretty soon. I'm hoping within the next week or so. We offer a service to people who are on our emailing list to provide information about activities having to do with archaeology, history, and cultures that are coming out mostly in the West. If you get onto our emailing list, we send out these announcements twice a month, and it includes a number of different organizations besides Old Pueblo Archaeology Center. We include our activities, of course, but many other organizations contribute these activity announcements. So if you're not already on our list, you can get it by going to our webpage and scrolling down and putting in your name and email address in the subscribe section, which you see here. Some of our upcoming presentations for the third Thursday Food for Thought program. Our next one on August 20th will be about indigenous trail networks and the engineering of cultural landscapes of the Sonoran Desert by preservation anthropologist Aaron Wright of Archaeology Southwest here in Tucson. In September, we'll have a program about the historic Buffalo Soldiers who were largely along the southern border of the United States in the early 20th century and getting into World War I. In October, we will have a live demonstration of macaw keeping by Kelly Taylor, who has macaws of her own and has had them for years. And she'll tell us how difficult it really is to keep macaws and give you some implications about that for how people did that in the pre-contact Southwest, because we do have macaw skeletons in various cultures here in the Southwest in pre-contact times. We also post a lot of our presentations, most of them on our YouTube channel. These are the most recent ones we have posted, including we've had some coyote action on our facility here in Tucson recently. So we have 3 of what we call our coyote shorts that are, some of them kind of funny. You might want to check those out. But you can go to YouTube and just Google Old Pueblo Archaeology YouTube, and you'll find our YouTube channel. What most of our revenues go to are educating children about archaeology and other cultures. We have a simulated archaeological dig set up at our facility in Tucson, which is on a Tucson Unified School District property, where we bring whole classrooms of kids in to teach them about archaeology and cultures and the scientific method. So again, most of our revenues go to that. And so we're always seeking donations and membership support to support that program in particular. So like we always do on these third Thursday programs, we're kind of figuratively passing the hat here, asking each of you to consider making a donation. You can do that online very easily. We also take checks in the mail. Probably not too wise to send cash in the mail, but we have other means where you can do that. So I will put this information into the chat here after I finish this slide here so you can know which websites to go to for these various things. So thank you all for coming, and let's get on with the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Al. Maybe we might be able to sell saguaro maybe to raise money as well. I only saw one.
Park, you mean?
Well, okay. I only saw one question. Maybe Al has seen more, but says this is from Lori. And now there are a lot of comments, so I will get to those as well. But if a state wants to sell public land, doesn't it first have to be approved by the federal government?
Walt, you're muted.
Sorry, if you're talking about state lands, for example, the state of Arizona got about 10.9 million acres of federal land when it became a state. I think that's 2 sections per township, probably section 16 and 36. The state sells those lands or leases those lands or mines those lands or whatever to generate funds. the state cannot sell federal public land. Only Congress can do that. And as I'm sure I know it says in the Arizona Statehood Act as well, if any land sold subsequent to Arizona becoming a state in 1910, I think, becoming a state, after the cost of the sale, the state of Arizona would get 5% of whatever the federal government gets for those land sales, and the federal government gets the other 95% of the net. And the lands are then gone probably to some wealthy person that outbid you and me for them, and we will be excluded.
Thank you. Al, did you see any questions other than that one by chance?
Yeah, if you click on your More button, Butch, down at the bottom, you'll see the Q&A.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they finally got there, I guess. Okay.
Go ahead and click on the Q&A and it'll pop up on your button.
Okay, so Carol asks, how many Spanish land grants are still actively owned by families in Texas? Do you know?
I do not know that. I've never looked that up. It's an interesting question. I don't know exactly how I would find that, but whoever had a Spanish or Mexican land grant initially, that was valid, and then they subsequently, in most cases, have sold those or subdivided those bigger estates into smaller. So it'd be a real maze to try to go back and find it, but I'm sure they could. Just an aside, also Arizona is about 38.6% federally owned land. We collectively own about 28.1 million acres in Arizona that we all still own collectively.
I was waiting for another point in there. And as you probably well know, Chaco in northern Arizona is under attack in many ways. So Diana is asking, best way to support Chaco from private interests?
Best way to support, well, is to tell your congressional delegation that this is altogether wrong. This should not happen, and get your friends. People ask me all the time, what can we do? The best thing you can do is literally call your representatives and senators, and they're going to take your name and where you live, your zip code anyway, and see that you're a constituent, and then tell them, because they log all phone calls, and they put a name down, they put your issue down, and they put your perspective on that. And the more calls, the better, because that gets reported to their boss as, hey, we got something going on here we need to know about. People are upset or concerned about this. So that's a great way to get your delegation to understand you don't want this to happen. If there's a legal question about doing it, and there well may be a legal question because of the requirements to protect a site like Chaco from being compromised, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a physical compromise. It can be a viewshed compromise, which would be oil development on the boundary of Chaco. If you've been to Chaco, you know you're going to see a lot of things easily from there, and it's a very, very significant cultural site to the ancestral Puebloan, or the people of today that are kin to the ancestral Puebloans, especially. So, that's one. We just had the attack, which is going to be in court for the next couple of years, on the Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears, where they've chopped them down, in both cases, at least 90%. And that's going to be a major question to be discussed is, does it make any sense legally? Could it possibly have been the intent of Congress when they passed the Antiquities Act that if one president establishes a national monument, that another president can come along and abolish it or reduce it? It would seem that that would be nonsensical. It wouldn't make any sense, and that the question is, can anybody other than Congress get rid of or reduce an existing national monument? I personally think that logically the answer to that would be only Congress could do it, but that's going to be a legal question that's got to be decided and maybe someday even added to the Antiquities Act, one sentence that says any monument established under the guidance of this act can only be reduced, or eliminated by act of Congress. But it's going to get tied up in court, and it's just wasting a lot of money and frustration for a lot of people.
There's a comment that I think I could probably testify to when I was in high school, and I hope I pronounce this person's name correctly. Sharona. Oh, okay. It's so important that you're reviewing this history. Most of my college students don't know it, and that's tragic. I specialize in Latin American, Southwestern, and culture, and I used to think maybe the students don't know it because they only focus on the English-speaking world. But then I've seen it. Oops, just lost it. But then I've seen that unfortunately today's American college students also don't know any of the other English-speaking histories as well. No, Walt, your story sounds like my life. This is from Carol. I served the U.S. for 33 years with Forest Service, Park Service, BLM, and Bureau of Rec. And public lands belong to all of us. A number of, wow, this is, thank you very much. That was great. I guess this is, Kathleen says this is one of the best presentations I've attended. And as a reminder, this program has been recorded too, Al, isn't that right? On the YouTube channel?
Yeah, but Butch, also on the gentleman's comment, the first one you read, I think it was a person that may be a teacher that said that.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right. And one thing is that anything that I have, and my website we should have posted it, but it's americaspublicland.com. Anything on there, you're welcome to use, including this presentation. It's not copyrighted. I don't sell it. I don't make any money on it. It's yours. My whole goal is to get the word out, because your observation that a lot of people don't know their history, that's true. And if you don't know what is true and what is historical in today's environment, with so much absolute malarkey being spread around that makes no sense and is factually not true, you're at a disadvantage if you don't know what is true. The other thing that really worries me is I would bet that 80% of young people in this country do not know what the public lands are, do not know that they personally are landowners, and that they could be doing many of the things that I assume the people on this webinar do regularly, because most of you probably are in Arizona, or at least in the West, and we take it for granted maybe, but a lot of people don't know that. And if you don't know about it, if you don't develop an appreciation for it because you use it and you experienced it and you had special experiences out there, then you have no incentive to protect it and make sure we keep it. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here, and something I'm hoping that all of you will help spread the word out is these are your lands. There's people trying to take them away from us, and you need to get involved, and you need to get out there and use them. Actually, somebody asked what you can do in addition to contacting your congressional delegation, which is really important. Somebody set me up with an Instagram account to try to reach young people, and they said you need to do like 1 minute videos, and they set me up one called the Ranger Walt. If any of you are on Instagram, you can pull it up and you'll see some of those. I just spent 21 days rowing the Grand Canyon, which at 80 years old was a little challenging. 21 days of loading and unloading those damn boats 42 times and rowing all day. And anyway, I took a number of more videos, and I'm going to do it there. And I've got one loaded I could do, Alan, it just as an example of it. But this is a fun thing, and it's a way to get people involved in participating and while they're out there on the lands. But Alan, would it be a good time to maybe show one of those?
Yeah, go for it.
Let me just do this one right here. Hey y'all, this is Ranger Walt. I'm out on our public lands. Behind me are the Collegiate Peaks in the San Isabel National Forest. You and I own that, and this land I'm standing on, which is administered by BLM. There's folks trying every day to get them away from us. I really would encourage you to do a little video like I'm doing here with you today. Introduce yourself, maybe say where you grew up, and talk about why these lands are important to you. Share that with your friends and let them know there's people trying to get them away from us, and they are focused on doing it, and that you guys need to defend them. This is your future. I'm an old guy. It's not my future, but it sure is yours, and it would be an irreversible tragedy to lose them. Call your congressmen and senators. Tell them no way. And other than that, get out and have fun on your land. See you next time. Hey y'all, this is Ranger Walt. Here's another example of.
I grew up in Moab, Utah, lived in Texas. Now I live in Munich, Germany, and I am back in the US visiting family here in Colorado, out riding my mountain bike on my public lands here in Colorado. It's been great living in Germany. I think that's also afforded me the opportunity to learn how important this resource we have in the US is. And when people ask me, what do you miss most about the US and living there? I say the wilderness. And what I mean by that is these public lands, this BLM land, the Forest Service land, the national parks. I miss being out where I can go ride my bike, be by myself. In a lot of cases, you don't pay a fee, and you just have these amazing, incredible spaces that are nowhere else in the world. And so I'm here enjoying them. I hope you also enjoy your public lands.
So those are just a couple of examples of what I was talking about. You can all do that too. And it's just a way I've been told young people are not going to sit there and listen to a long presentation, but they like getting into this a minute thing of sharing their experiences and their ideas and their adventures and that kind of thing. And it's a good way to get the word out and help educate them. If that's useful at all. Again, anything that I have on this is on that website is yours to use, and maybe Alan can put my website on this site, whatever. But it's just americaspublicland.com, and it's got a bunch of video shorts. It's got a number of podcasts on it, national podcast, and it's got the video you just saw.
And we will be posting this presentation on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay.
Walter, thank you. Well, in summary, well, first of all,
Well, you got one more question in the queue.
oh, okay.
Rich. Why don't you go for that? It's kind of an interesting one.
I don't, could you read it? I don't see it.
Yeah. This is from Gene Reeds. He says, our public lands were originally occupied by Native Americans. Some feel that these should be returned to tribes. Others suggest that, quote, co-management is a better option. Do you have any thoughts on this?
No, that's a in-depth question. I understand they were native lands. I'd say that right at the beginning of my presentation. I don't have a solution for this. There's some places like Bears Ears that I worked on initially, and I worked on the governance part of that with some of the folks when that was coming together. I think it absolutely makes sense to include native perspectives in management focus and decisions. The transfer of the lands, these things are extremely expensive to manage, and it takes a lot of money to do that and so forth. I just think it's a huge issue to have to sit down and really look at all the components of it to see what makes sense. I will tell you that we are going to have to go back in after this current administration. I'm not going to get into politics, but the BLM, the Forest Service, and the Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife were already hurting trying to operate these lands, especially when you see the increase in outdoor recreation. That is a piece of the multiple use component of these lands, especially BLM and the Forest Service, that has absolutely outpaced in economic value many of the other consumptive uses, and in fact, most of them together. To give you an example, the outdoor recreation, and this is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis with the Department of Commerce for 2026, I think it was, for Arizona, is $15.4 billion in economic activity and nearly 119,000 jobs. It is a huge deal. And that's another reason if these lands were to be sold or go away and become privatized, all those people that are making those livings, whether they're guides or outfitters or whatever they're doing, they would no longer have that land to make those livings, because whoever bought them is not going to invite those kind of things to continue on those lands. So that's another reason. Outdoor recreation in America is a $1.2 trillion industry. That's real money. And again, those are not my figures. They're Department of Commerce.
Walter, thank you very much. That young lady that you saw in the video a few moments ago is Robin, and that's Walt's youngest daughter. And I had the pleasure of watching her grow up. And sort of get choked up saying that one, but this last comment, I think, summarizes by Joanna. Excellent presentation. Thank you for sharing your years of experience in advocating for preserving public lands with grateful appreciation from Douglas County, Colorado. And I think that sort of summarizes this. Walter, do you have any last comments you might want to say? And then I'll ask Al as well.
The only thing I'll say is, those of us, at least the three of us that I can see here, are our odometers are pretty high up, and that kind of, I just think it's incumbent on us all to not sit back and watch this attack on the public lands, and it's broader than the public lands. We need to be vigilant, we need to be involved, and we need to do everything we can to make sure these lands stay in our hands and they pass on to future generations. I've been in this so long, and I've talked to so many people from all over the world who come over here initially, in most cases, to visit units of the national park system. And then they come to a place like Moab, Utah, and they find out the parks were great, but you mean I can go up there on that mountain, the La Salles, and and that's okay? Or I can go out here on a mountain bike and ride till the wheels fall off, and that's okay? And the answer is yes, and that's unique in the world. The rest of the world has almost nothing like that, and we are so lucky. And it's not only that we're lucky and we can use them; it's a gold mine to us if we do it right and share that with the world. It'll keep generating for us forever. So, yeah, my word is we need to all be vigilant and get in this fight and make sure we keep these places in our common ownership.
Before I summarize and thank you, Al, do you have any last comments you might like to say?
Not really. I thought this was an excellent presentation and very informative. And I think you're right that most people have no clue about, what our public land really is, and that it does belong to all of us. So I really appreciate this presentation, Walt.
Thanks for inviting.
Well, anecdotally, before I sign off, I've lived in the most beautiful places in our country, including Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Glacier, and my heart are in the Catalina Mountains right behind me, which is where I'm going to have my ashes spread. So on that note, I would like to thank you, Walter, for giving us a super presentation. Don't forget Al Dart's bouncing hat for donations. If you can, please do so. And I guess I just want to thank everybody for showing up. We very much appreciate it. So,
don't get in any hurry to spread your ashes, buddy.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll try not to. Thank you, Walter, and thank you, audience, for hanging in there with us on a great presentation. So, good night, everybody.
Take care and good night, and thank you.
Thanks, Walt. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.